My father-in-law was a tough Irish kid from the Depression. A plumber who served in WWII, raised 6 kids. Hard work and self-sufficiency, that was his core. Sometime in his mid-80s, well, we all knew he was slipping. He'd lose his train of thought sometimes, flashes of anger occasionally wander off. It worried us a lot. One afternoon, I found him just sitting by himself, and there were tears quietly slipping down his cheeks. I'd never seen him cry before, ever. "Dad, what's wrong?" I asked him. He looked up, almost ashamed, and he said, "I can't remember who I am. They call it dementia." Then there was my friend David. By 90, he was slipping too. When I'd see him, he'd often greet me with, "I'm sure I had a great weekend," letting me know he couldn't remember. "But if you like, I think I could retrieve the information for you." No one called it dementia. Then there was Gilda, my family's matriarch. At 94, she was still driving, playing cards, fiercely debating politics. Yes, sure, she'd forget things more and more often. She died peacefully at 98. No one ever said she had dementia. 3 people, all aging, all forgetting.
Yet only one was given the label of a terrifying degenerative disease. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? If the experience is so varied, what exactly is this disease we call dementia? Or was it perhaps something we invented? Okay, let's unpack this. What we're diving into today is truly fascinating and I think deeply important. We're going to explore how what we call dementia is understood, not just medically, but culturally and socially too. This deep dive it'll illuminate what that means for how we treat older adults, how we approach care, and maybe how we view the whole aging process itself. We have some incredibly rich material to guide us, and it really challenges many of the assumptions we might hold.
Indeed. You'll find that thinking critically about dementia, it absolutely challenges many long-held assumptions. We're going to be looking at the profound ways society defines cognitive change and how powerful economic forces play a surprising role in shaping our understanding, which is something maybe we don't always think about. And also what other cultures and historical periods have taught us about aging, memory, and support. It really is a deep dive into challenging what we think we know, and perhaps maybe offering a more nuanced, possibly even hopeful perspective.
Right. So let's kick things off by exploring that first part, how the classification of cognitive decline as dementia has profoundly reshaped our societies and our relationships. It's a story not just of scientific discovery, as you said, but of culture and, well, power dynamics at play.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is the journey from that broad, often quite ageist idea of senility to the more specific medicalized concept of Alzheimer's disease. Historically, senility was just a catch-all term, wasn't it? Frequently used to dismiss the elderly as simply losing it due to old age without much distinction or real understanding. But then, in the 1960s, leading figures in the burgeoning field of gerontology, people like Robert N. Butler, who later became the first director of the American Institute on Aging, they actively pushed to replace this vague, ageist image.
Okay, so they wanted to change. Why?
Well, their goal was essentially to frame Alzheimer's as a distinct, identifiable disease. They hoped that by medicalizing it, defining it as a specific pathology, it would attract more public funding for research and care. Move it out of the shadows of just being seen as normal old age.
That sounds like a positive step forward, really, trying to destigmatize it, get recognition, get resources.
It was absolutely an intention. However, this medicalization, while it was aiming to destigmatize, paradoxically ended up strengthening a very strong and often quite negative link between memory loss and, well, individual dissolution. Instead of just being seen as maybe a part of aging for some, it became this terrifying individual disease.
I see. So the focus shifted.
It really did. Cultural narratives, media portrayals, they began to show people with dementia through what some researchers describe as zombie-like terror and suffering. Think about how often in films or TV, a character with dementia is shown as like a vacant shell, a shadow of their former self, stripped of agency, identity.
Yeah, that's a common trope.
It shifted the focus from a potential part of aging to a terrifying individual disease that seems to erase who you are. And this framing, despite all the significant investment in the search for cures, drug development, and expansion of diagnostic technologies by the scientific community, well, it hasn't always translated into improved direct care for those actually living with the diagnosis. The focus on a cure often overshadows that crucial need for just day-to-day support and understanding.
It's almost like we traded one fear for another, just dressed up differently. And this framing, this idea of what loss means, it has real, tangible consequences for how we perceive and treat individuals.
Absolutely. Consider the concept of personhood within dementia research. It's really evolved over time. Initially, discussions of personhood and dementia often centered on this idea of loss, isolation, dissolution, really focusing on what was perceived to be irrevocably lost due to the cognitive decline.
So focusing on the deficits.
Exactly. But critics argued, quite rightly, that this view was far too narrow and, frankly, dehumanizing. Even the popular person-centered care approaches that emerged, which were definitely a step forward in challenging a purely biomedical view of deficit, well, sometimes they overlooked the broader systemic conditions of care.
How so? What did they miss?
Well, for instance, if a care system is underfunded because of austerity cuts, even the best intentions of person-centered care can be undermined, can't they? It leaves fundamental rights and the holistic personhood of those with dementia and also their care partners often unrecognized.
So it's not enough to just intend person-centered care if the system itself isn't set up to actually support it.
Precisely. More recent and quite radical work aims to decenter humanism. Now, that sounds academic, I know, but it essentially means moving beyond the idea that personhood is only about our higher cognitive functions, like perfect language or perfect memory. Instead, it recognizes that personhood is expressed in bodily rather than strictly cognitive ways.
Bodily ways. Okay. What does that look like in practice?
It means behaviors that are often seen as problematic, things like wandering, maybe incoherence, or what gets labeled as non-compliance. They can be reinterpreted. Instead of just being dismissed as disturbing behaviors or symptoms of the pathology,
Right.
they can be understood as consistent with lifelong bodily dispositions, habits, preferences, ways of being in the world. It suggests a persistent self, just viewed from a non-neurocentric perspective.
Could you give us an example of that? Like, how does focusing on bodily ways change how we might understand a seemingly challenging behavior?
Sure. Think about someone who might pace constantly or maybe tap their foot rhythmically. Instead of automatically seeing it as agitation or a symptom of their dementia or even just a physical need, a decentered approach might consider their past. Perhaps they were a male terrier who walked miles every day,
Right.
or a keen hiker, or maybe a musician who always kept time. Their body is still expressing a core embodied part of their identity, even if their cognitive recall of that specific past is fragmented, or maybe they can't verbalize it.
Okay. So it's looking for the meaning behind the action, rooted in their history.
Exactly. This reframing allows us to see agency and continuity where we might have only seen deficit before. This is why things like arts-based programs, dancing, singing things that draw on what's called embodied procedural memory, the memory of how to do things, how to move, rather than just facts.
Like muscle memory almost.
Yes, precisely. These are increasingly encouraged as meaningful forms of communication and self-expression. They allow individuals to connect with their identity and with others, even when verbal communication is difficult or impossible. It's about meeting them where they are, in their bodies, with their unique histories.
That's a powerful and, frankly, much more empathetic shift in perspective. It suggests that even if someone isn't communicating verbally in ways we easily understand, their identity, their self, is still very much alive through their body and actions. It fundamentally redefines what it means to be a person.
It really does. And this redefinition, or sometimes the lack of it, leads us to a deeply impactful societal issue. How we often unconsciously define whose lives are grievable. You know, the idea of grieving for the living. It's a powerful and pervasive trope in cultural narratives about dementia.
I've heard that phrase.
It implies that a diagnosis signals a kind of social or even living death, as if the person as we knew them is already gone, even though their life is evidently ongoing. This narrative, in essence, denies the validity of the life that is evidently ongoing. It also contributes to casting certain lives as ungrievable by linking them to categories like, say, the mentally ill, who are sometimes seen as outside of reason or civilization.
So popular culture, like films and TV, plays a role in reinforcing these often dehumanizing ideas.
Yes, absolutely. We see this starkly in how films often frame dementia. They frequently focus heavily on the loss of cognition and memory, equating it to a total loss of selfhood. Within those narratives, exercising agency, like maybe choosing to end one's life, can tragically become the only rational or understandable path portrayed because the alternative is painted as so bleak.
Which perpetuates a very narrow, often negative view.
Exactly. Overwhelmingly negative images are prevalent in the media, generating significant fear. And these depictions aren't just negative, they're often medicalizing, ageist, highly racialized, and socially limited. What's more, they frequently feature care provided by heroic family members to typically class-privileged subjects, while racialized care workers are often just backgrounded or entirely absent from the picture. This creates a very specific, often skewed image of who experiences dementia and who provides the care.
And that impacts how it's understood more broadly.
Absolutely. It impacts how dementia is understood culturally, socially, and politically, which ultimately hinders efforts to improve care for everyone. A critical analysis of these frames is crucial, really, to understanding how norms about what it means to be human are established, and how lives are allocated and retracted, aggrandized, personified, degraded, and disavowed. It reveals the underlying assumptions that infuse political, social, and medical narratives.
That sounds like it has incredibly serious real-world implications, not just theoretical ones.
It certainly does, and this became chillingly clear during the COVID-19 pandemic. In May 2021, a series of texts and images were leaked to the press, giving some insight into the frenzied planning within the UK government in the early months of the pandemic. One particular image, a whiteboard from a strategy meeting on March 13, 2020, included the stark, horrifying question: who do we not save?
Wow, that's chilling.
It is. And sadly, the answer, based on the resulting death tolls and the patterns of care, was often people with dementia. They were disproportionately represented in fatalities and faced severe privations. This exposed what's called a necropolitics of dementia.
That necropolitics you mentioned, where certain lives were deemed less grievable during the pandemic, that's a really powerful concept. For our listeners, can you maybe define necropolitics a bit more broadly, just so we understand the framework?
Absolutely. Necropolitics is a concept really developed by the philosopher Achille Mbembe. It explores how power and political decisions can determine who gets to live and who is left to die. Or, sometimes more subtly, whose lives are considered worth saving, protecting, and mourning. It's about how states can exercise power over life and death, often implicitly, through policy, neglect, or resource allocation. In the context of dementia during the pandemic, it highlights how systemic decisions effectively devalued the lives of people with dementia, leading to disproportionate suffering and death without adequate public acknowledgement or mourning.
So it wasn't necessarily an explicit policy, but the outcome of policies and neglect.
Precisely. Care homes became literal sites of concentration for people with dementia. Many were transferred from hospitals without screening. They remained locked down, visitors barred, even as other restrictions lifted for the general population. Crucially, no official spaces were created to mourn these lives, sending a stark message that they were somehow not to be grieved. This revealed a set of practices that abandon and neglect older people with care needs, intertwining deeply with the political economy of marketized care. It showed how the system was structured, perhaps unintentionally but devastatingly, to allow this kind of disproportionate suffering.
That's a stark example of how societal perceptions translate directly into policy and ultimately human cost. It speaks to a deep systemic issue.
It truly is. The pandemic starkly exposed what some scholars call precarious aging, where older people with dementia in care homes face an intensification in the extent of unmet needs. This precarity stems from several interconnected factors. First, these biomedicalized understandings and approaches that prioritize diagnosis and medical treatment over social well-being and quality of life. Second, a financialized care market that often prioritizes profit over people, leading to things like understaffing and inadequate resources. And third, their construction as devalued subjects within society, which makes their needs less visible or less prioritized.
This perspective suggests that care homes, which we often see as benevolent institutions, places of safety, can in effect contribute to a form of systemic discrimination.
That's exactly right. This perspective argues that care homes, despite intentions, can in fact amount to discrimination, segregation, and incarceration that violate fundamental human rights. Rights like equality, legal capacity, liberty, and independent living and community inclusion. This is explored through the lens of critical disability studies, which argues that ableism, that's the discrimination and social prejudice against people with disabilities based on the belief that typical abilities are superior, leads to what's called ontological violence.
Ontological violence, that's a heavy phrase. What does that practically mean for someone living with dementia and their experience in the world? How does that manifest?
Ontological violence is essentially the denial of a legitimate right to be recognized as fully human. It's when a person's very being, their existence, is devalued or undermined. It makes it difficult for them to be seen as having agency, valid experiences, a voice that matters. In the context of dementia, it means their pain, their struggles, their remaining capabilities often can't be fully comprehended or acknowledged because their lives are implicitly devalued. They're deemed incapable of eliciting full grief or respect. For example, when someone's concerns are dismissed simply as, oh, that's just their dementia speaking, It's a subtle but real form of this violence. It strips their words of legitimacy.
Right. It invalidates their entire experience. But despite such restrictive and often dehumanizing environments, there's also a powerful counter-narrative, isn't there? Of resilience and resistance within these challenging environments. People find ways to push back and maintain their identity.
Absolutely. Despite these constraints, people find incredibly resourceful, often creative, ways to express themselves and maintain their identity. We see this in what's called cultural resistance, or the carnivalesque, in dementia care environments. The term carnivalesque, which comes from the work of the philosopher Mikhail Bakhtin, describes a kind of popular humor, especially when it's directed against officialdom or adversity. It's humor as protest.
Humor as protest.
Yes, it transforms typical humor into an act of protest, a way of building one's own world in opposition to the official one. It embodies a sense of freedom and subversion. This often involves using humor, which can sometimes be scatological or a bit ribald, to mock officialdom or hardship. For example, one woman who grew up in extreme poverty in 1930s Liverpool, she would describe her hometown as where they eat muck, but wash it first. She wasn't just being funny. She was transforming the hardship of her past into this humorous, defiant statement. It was a way of owning her history, you know?
It's like laughing in the face of the absurd, using wit to reclaim a bit of power.
Exactly. Or finding humor in everyday interactions and reclaiming agency through shared experiences. We've seen examples where stories told by people with dementia and their spontaneous conversations with each other are just rich in vernacular detail. They're not always compliant with the official history or the expected narrative. For instance, during footage recorded in the local market, two women became really animated. They commented, looking at jars on a sweet stall, "We'll have all the top row and all the bottom row." Then they playfully added to the researcher, "We'll give you one if you like." The bustling sounds of the stall holders shouting their wares, it made the market feel more real. It reminded me of Bakhtin's discussion of marketplace cries, which he saw as embodying this utopian banquet for all people, filled with aroma and sound. These interactions were about joy, connection, shared experience, not just about testing memory.
It's incredible how these everyday moments become these small acts of resistance. They're finding moments of joy and connection that really defy the expectations of their condition.
Yes, and participants frequently refer to buying and exchanging goods, shops, the challenges of finding and cooking food, all deeply rooted in experiences of poverty and resourcefulness from their past. One woman from Liverpool, with its large Irish Catholic population, she even shared the seemingly unlikely but true story of a shop that sold nothing but potatoes, or spuds. This anecdote, linking to a peculiar culture of the marketplace and its itinerant hawkers, going way back to the 16th century, it echoed the street language of the northern UK in the 1930s. It wasn't just a memory. It was a connection to a shared cultural history, a bond forged through difficult times, and a powerful assertion of a personal narrative that defied her present circumstances.
That kind of shared memory, that cultural background, must be incredibly important for maintaining a sense of self.
It is. And communal singing, particularly pub and piano sing-alongs, also plays a huge role in preserving identity and relationships, especially when they have these humorously subversive themes. Think of songs about Moonlight Flits, which was about leaving rented accommodation without paying the rent, a defiant act born of poverty, or songs with veiled sexual allusions like Daddy Wouldn't Buy Me a Bow Wow. Sounds innocent, right? But it often carried a double meaning, winking at adult themes in a way that challenged, say, Victorian sensibilities. These popular festive forms are deeply traditional and bring an atmosphere of freedom and familiarity. One woman, who had actually lived in a public house as a child and knew just a vast range of popular songs by heart, she would often sing aloud. Explicitly as a way of preserving her identity and her personal relationships, one song she particularly loved, "I Don't Care Who Knows It, I'm in Love with You," was always introduced with the poignant words, "And my husband used to sing to me." It's a powerful reminder that even if individual status has been fragmented, a person's identity can persist, often through these deeply embodied and relational memories that connect them to their past and their loved ones.
It's clear that these individuals are not simply defined by their diagnosis. They're finding all these ways to express who they are through their actions, their memories, their humor. This is beautifully illustrated by someone like Don, you mentioned.
Absolutely. Consider the example of Don, an 89-year-old man who often recounts his RAF experiences from World War II. Even amidst noisy care workers joking about soldiers and gunfire in the background, perhaps not the most sensitive environment, he asserts quite calmly, "It all seems like a dream to me now." Now, this isn't just a nostalgic statement. It's a subtle resistance to his confined present reality, contrasted with his past activity. His quiet assertion speaks volumes.
How so? What's the resistance there?
It implies, I was never still like I am now. He's referencing not just physical immobility, but the confinement itself, and asserting his enduring self against the limited reality of his care environment. It's a way of saying, look, I was once an active, vital person involved in significant events, and that part of me is still here, even if my body or my circumstances have changed. It's a quiet defiance.
That's such a clever, subtle way to push back. It reminds you, again and again, that these individuals are not simply defined by their diagnosis, but are complex human beings with rich inner lives and histories. Okay, that brings us nicely to our next point. Let's dig into the intricate economic incentives and pharmaceutical industry influences that have shaped our understanding and treatment of dementia. It's not just about the science, is it? There's money involved, power structures.
Not at all. There's a really powerful biomedical paradigm that continues to cast a long shadow over the entire field of dementia studies. This paradigm, it strongly favors the search for cures, the development of drugs, the expansion of diagnostic technologies within the scientific community. The whole underlying assumption is that dementia is primarily a pathological condition, a disease that needs to be treated or cured through medical intervention.
A disease-focused approach.
Very much so. However, despite really significant investment in these areas, we're talking billions of dollars poured into research and drug trials, these efforts haven't necessarily advanced or substantially improved the direct day-to-day care for people actually diagnosed with dementia.
So there's a kind of disconnect between the massive investment in research, the hunt for a cure, and the actual lived experience on the ground for people and their families.
Precisely. In many cases, the intense focus on a future cure has overshadowed the practical day-to-day support that people need now. It creates this significant disconnect between the research agenda and the immediate lived experience of those affected. And this biomedical focus, it aligns almost seamlessly with what are called financialized care markets and the increasing privatization of care systems.
Okay, what do you mean by financialized care markets?
These are systems where care, especially for the elderly or those with chronic conditions, is treated essentially as a commodity, a service to be bought and sold, often by large corporations or even private equity firms whose primary goal is profit, not necessarily optimal care.
And how does that play out for people with dementia?
Well, these market-driven systems often impose incredibly high costs for care. That inevitably leads to social exclusion for many people with dementia, particularly those without significant personal wealth or really robust family support networks. The very existence of so many people with conditions that resist many effective treatments, meaning, they aren't curable with a quick pill or a single intervention, is, in a way, antipathetic to medical myths of treatment and cure.
Because the system wants a fix.
Exactly. The system is often set up to find and market solutions, drugs, technologies, and if a condition like dementia doesn't neatly fit that mold, it creates significant cost implications for care. This is especially true in what we call neoliberal states, where the dominant thinking often emphasizes individual responsibility and support rather than robust collective provision through well-funded public services. So essentially, the system is often designed to favor individual high-cost medical treatments over broader, more accessible social care solutions. This creates a real tension with the day-to-day reality of living with dementia.
This really sounds like dementia isn't just a medical problem at all, but a deeply economic and political one too, embedded right in our societal structures.
It absolutely is. And it gets even more complex when we consider how certain groups are affected differently. For example, the depoliticized cultural framings often used in dementia research, especially when talking about minority ethnicities, tend to focus on cultural difference as the main barrier to care.
What do you mean by that?
It means that if, say, an ethnic minority group isn't accessing dementia care services at the same rate, the narrative might blame their culture, maybe saying they're hesitant or distrustful of medicine, or prefer to care for their own. This approach conveniently overlooks and consequently silences the very real impact of racism or bias. It fails to acknowledge the racialized inequalities, exclusions, racial discrimination, and racialized subject positions that are deeply embedded in society. These systemic issues create significant disparities in diagnosis rates, access to quality care, and the overall experience of dementia. By framing it as purely cultural, it avoids addressing the systemic injustices that are often the real root cause.
That's a really important point. And how do organizations like charities or corporations involved in dementia care use this narrative? Do they play a role in this depoliticization?
Yes. Sometimes inadvertently, sometimes perhaps more strategically. We see dementia-related storytelling frequently woven into the public face of corporate and charitable service provider organizations. These stories are often presented as highly individualized, biographically oriented, and politically insulated. They highlight personal struggle, resilience, and self-realization. You know, the kind of stories a heroic family member coping or someone living well despite their diagnosis?
It can be very moving and inspiring.
They can, absolutely, and they serve a dual purpose. They anchor claims to allyship and help justify public funding by showing relatable, often inspiring personal journeys. It makes the issue feel manageable and personal.
But that sounds like it could also mask deeper issues.
It can. It's a really delicate balance because these very same organizations are often tasked with rationing and even withdrawing support as funding cuts impact the care system. This creates what some call a hidden curatorial hand, where these powerful individual stories, while moving, can inadvertently overshadow the collective systemic impact of underfunding social care. By focusing so heavily on the individual, these narratives can effectively assert control over the public narrative of dementia, framing it primarily as an individual challenge to be overcome, rather than one of systemic inequity and a shared societal responsibility that requires political solutions.
It sounds like a difficult balance, that tension between individual stories that inspire action and connect with people and the broader systemic issues that really need addressing. It's the personal versus the political again.
It really highlights how knowledge is socially constructed and historically contingent. Our understanding of dementia isn't just some fixed, objective scientific truth. It's profoundly shaped by social, economic, and historical contexts. Recognizing this provides crucial opportunities to challenge those dominant perspectives and maybe depoliticize dementia from being seen solely as an individual struggle. Instead, it can be reframed as a matter of systemic and structural inequity and oppression. This calls for a radical rethinking of dementia, moving towards what some call a politics of coalition.
A politics of coalition.
Yes, uniting different groups and perspectives, people living with dementia, their families, caregivers, advocates, researchers, policymakers, to advocate for broader systemic change, rather than just focusing on individual coping mechanisms or waiting for that elusive medical cure.
Okay, let's shift our lens now and look at aging and cognitive changes through historical and cross-cultural perspectives. We often assume our Western medical model is the default, maybe even universal, but that's certainly not the case, is it? There's so much to learn from other ways of seeing the world.
You've hit on a crucial point there. Different cultures have vastly different understandings of aging and memory changes, and these understandings profoundly shape how individuals experience later life and any cognitive shifts. For example, Western societies, often characterized by individualism, place a huge emphasis on personal autonomy and independence.
Right. Being self-sufficient.
Exactly. But this can unfortunately lead to more negative perceptions of aging because growing old is frequently associated with a loss of independence, a loss of control, maybe the ability to drive or live alone. The fear of losing control over one's life can be a significant psychological and emotional burden in these contexts.
Whereas in other cultures,
well, in contrast, many collectivist cultures, like those often found in East Asia, place a much higher value on family and community interdependence. This often leads to more positive attitudes toward aging and a generally stronger support network for older adults. Intergenerational living, shared responsibilities, these are often the norm. These cultures often prioritize the wisdom and experience that come with age, seeing elders as repositories of knowledge and cultural heritage, even if they also focus on investing in younger generations. It's a complex balance, but that communal support is central.
So our core cultural values directly shape how we see growing older, and even how we interpret cognitive changes that might happen in later life. It's not just biology, it's our entire worldview.
Precisely. And even the concepts of masculinity and femininity within a culture play a role, believe it or not. In so-called masculine societies that deeply value things like competitiveness, assertiveness, physical strength, aging might be viewed more negatively because it's associated with a decline in physical strength and productivity. The aging body is seen as less capable, which can diminish an individual's perceived worth or status.
Okay.
Conversely, feminine societies, those that place more emphasis on relationships, nurturing, quality of life, may view aging more positively. There's a greater emphasis on well-being and emotional support for older adults, valuing the relational aspects of later life over mere physical prowess or economic output. It highlights how deeply ingrained cultural norms affect our very perception of what a valuable human life looks like at different stages.
And this affects everything, right down to how people interact with the healthcare system and how care is provided.
Yes, profoundly so. Cultural beliefs influence everything from whether someone seeks a timely diagnosis to their acceptance of illness and even their communication with medical staff. For instance, in some languages, there's literally no word for dementia in everyday language that corresponds directly to the medical condition. Instead, they might use terms like forgetful, obsessed, confused, or even reverted to childhood.
And some of those sound quite negative.
Some can be euphemisms trying to soften a difficult reality, but others are clearly derogatory or suggest mockery, carrying significant stigma. And if dementia isn't recognized or perceived as a distinct medical condition requiring professional intervention, people may not seek or may actively miss out on medical and social care that could otherwise benefit them. This can lead to significant delays in support, poorer outcomes, and an increased burden on families who might not even realize help is available or appropriate.
This can lead to serious misunderstandings then between patients, families, and healthcare providers who are just operating from completely different frameworks of understanding.
Absolutely. And the concept of pride, honor, and shame is deeply intertwined with religious and social beliefs in some cultures, adding another complex layer to caregiving. For example, in certain contexts, not providing care when needed may be considered as bringing shame on the family. This isn't just about the individual. It can have far-reaching consequences on the direct and extended family. It leads to immense pressure on individuals, often daughters or daughters-in-law, to provide all care internally, regardless of their capacity or resources.
Which is very different from the West.
Yes, it contrasts sharply with the Western attitude that people have a right to professional care and that governments have a responsibility to provide it. That frames care more as a right, maybe a societal responsibility, rather than solely a family obligation rooted in honor and shame. This fundamental difference impacts whether female carers, for instance, feel they can seek external support. They might fear being criticized for not being able or willing to provide care, or for somehow letting the family down, even if they are struggling under the immense physical and emotional burden of caregiving alone.
So for healthcare professionals working in diverse communities, intercultural sensitivity isn't just a nice to have, like a soft skill. It's absolutely essential for providing effective care.
It is critical for effective, culturally appropriate care. And this means acknowledging that not everyone in a particular ethnic group shares the same values about care or even has a family. Cultural identities are fluid and individual, not monolithic stereotypes. Practically, this involves things like learning a few words and phrases in a person's mother tongue. It demonstrates positive curiosity and can be incredibly reassuring and welcoming. It also means paying close attention to nonverbal communication, which can convey so much, especially when language is a barrier. And crucially, it means using professional interpreters for important discussions about health status, treatment options, services. Relying on family members to interpret can be really problematic. They might feel uncomfortable, they might be biased, or they might unintentionally misinterpret complex medical information. It's vital to explain why using a professional is sometimes necessary for accuracy and impartiality.
That's a really practical deep dive into the nuances of providing good care across cultures.
It really is. And the stereotype content model, a psychological theory, further shows that caregivers' cultural stereotypes influence the type of care provided. For example, if caregivers tend to attribute low competence and high warmth to older adults, seeing them as sweet but basically incapable, it can lead to what's called paternalistic prejudice.
Paternalistic prejudice.
Yeah, it's where caregivers behave in an overprotective or infantilizing manner. They might talk down to the person, make decisions for them without real consultation, or treat them like a child. This kind of interaction, even if it's well-intentioned, can negatively impact the patient's functionality, their autonomy, their overall well-being by reducing their opportunities to make choices or exercise their remaining abilities.
It sounds like we need to challenge these really deeply ingrained assumptions about aging and competence in order to provide truly person-centered, respectful care.
We absolutely do. And this ties into the emerging idea of neurodiversity as a paradigm to depathologize neurodivergence. Instead of viewing cognitive differences primarily as abnormalities or deficits that inherently need to be fixed or cured, this perspective proposes that diversity itself, including cognitive diversity, is normal and potentially valuable. It reframes what we consider normal brain function.
That sounds like a radical shift.
It is, and it aligns with alternative understandings found in various cultures which offer compelling counter-narratives to the dominant Western biomedical model. For example, the Choctaw interpretation of memory loss can be understood not as a disease, but as the mind being spiritually elsewhere. That reframing removes the medicalized stigma and provides a different, maybe more spiritual context for the experience. Similarly, we have powerful personal stories that illustrate these different experiences. Consider an Indigenous woman featured in one study who found that dementia brought her closer to her spiritual roots and helped her develop as an artist. These examples challenge the Western biomedical narrative by highlighting how cognitive changes can sometimes be integrated into a person's identity and even lead to new forms of flourishing and expression, rather than just being seen purely as a decline or a tragedy.
That's a beautiful way to think about it, not necessarily as a loss, but as a shift, maybe even a new path for discovery or connection. This really brings to life the need for truly individualized, respectful care that sees the whole person. Let's remember Dathy Clayton's story here, which is so powerful.
Yes, Dathy Clayton, an Irish human rights activist. They shared their incredibly poignant experience of getting a dementia diagnosis in Chicago, where it was handled professionally. But then returning to Ireland, they were met with skepticism and what they described as outright homophobia from a doctor who dismissed them, basically saying, "I don't see it," just dismissed their experience.
That must have been devastating.
Absolutely. Dathy, who identifies as non-binary and uses he/thee pronouns, then found safety and acceptance in Belgium. A young doctor there immediately asked about their preferred pronouns, a simple act, but profoundly affirming. This starkly highlights the vital need for LGBTQI inclusive care homes, like the Rainbow House in Stockholm. Dathy's experience illuminates how heteronormative care that just assumes a traditional heterosexual family structure and identity, often erases their identity for older LGBT plus people. It overlooks their unique life experiences, their relationships, their history.
So it's not just about tolerance, but active affirmation.
Exactly. Dathy emphasized the critical importance of caregivers understanding and celebrating their core identity, not just tolerating it. They stated passionately, "I want celebration. Celebrate me."
Mm-hmm.
They also spoke about wanting control over their entire fabulous life, including end-of-life choices like euthanasia, and crucially, not being drugged into submission in care settings. They highlighted the desire for proper pain management beyond a dismissive fucking cup of tea. It underscores this deep need for truly personalized care that respects an individual's identity, history, and autonomy right to the very end.
That story really brings to life the need for truly individualized, respectful care, understanding that identity is complex and multifaceted, especially as we age. Then there's Ronald Amanzi's journey, which touches on the power of creativity and self-definition.
Yes, Ronald Amanzi. He's a music producer and community worker who experienced a stroke and a brain injury before being diagnosed with dementia a couple of years later. He adopted the name Amanzi, which means the quality of a king, to culturally identify himself, and it became his pseudonym in the music industry. He actively uses creativity and music to improve the quality of life for those living with dementia, founding the Box of Smiles agenda and leading a music therapy radio program.
So he's channeling his experience into helping others.
Very much so. But he also observed that most support services are designed to encourage their clients to be dependent on medication and reliant on their services, which he found unhelpful for his own journey. He found the Alzheimer's Society helpful in some ways, but he noted that despite his diagnosis, he is not frail. He often needs empathy and encouragement and understanding, rather than constant hands-on support or being told to wait. He uses poetry and social media to share his experiences, asking why some professionals talk about seldom heard communities, referring to minority groups whose voices are often marginalized, but don't truly engage with romantic voices like Ronald's. He's advocating for real, empathetic listening and valuing diverse forms of expression and experience.
It's a powerful call to listen more closely, isn't it? To truly understand what support means for each individual beyond the standard service model. And Patrick Atimes, another advocate, also reminds us of the fundamental importance of human connection.
Patrick Atimes lives with both HIV and early onset dementia. He shared a really harrowing experience of having a blackout at Euston Station in London. He lost all memory of how he got there or even who he was in that moment, feeling utterly mortified by the sudden loss of self and identity. Patrick's experience of dementia also highlighted how people, even those he considered friends, sometimes tried to take advantage of me financially or emotionally, or would dismiss his memories by saying things like, "Oh, that's just your dementia kicking in."
That sounds incredibly isolating and invalidating.
Profoundly so. It affected his trust and challenged his perception of his own community. He found saving support from the LGBT Foundation and described a life-changing 3 months spent in Barbados with his gay mother, where he felt loved for the first time through simple human touch. He emphasizes that human touch is so important for people in care homes who may be deprived of it due to understaffing or a very medicalized, hands-off approach to care. He's become a crucial glue binding organizations like the Alzheimer's Society and the LGBT Foundation, advocating specifically for Black and people of color in dementia care, recognizing that dementia is predominantly white in its portrayal in media and research.
She's bridging gaps and highlighting intersections.
Exactly. He started as an activist because he saw no post-diagnostic support, specifically for younger people like himself. He needed to know how to continue with my new life on this dementia journey, not just focus on the later stages of care, nursing homes, legal affairs. His aim is to help others understand how to live meaningfully after diagnosis, not just prepare for decline.
His story truly underscores the importance of continued agency, purpose, and that critical role of genuine human connection and community support. And the story of Marcia and Birkby shows a beautiful example of deeply person-centered care happening within a family setting.
Yes, Marcia Griffith became a devoted care partner for her papa, Birkby, after he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. She made sure he was cared for at home with love and respect. Marcia actively continued to support Birkby's identity as a competitive athlete. She accompanied him to the British Columbia Seniors Games, where he still loved to show off his abilities as a runner, even if he didn't complete every race. Marcia noted that Birkby became a kind of celebrity there, drawing attention and validating his enduring identity as an athlete.
That's wonderful, keeping that part of him alive.
Absolutely. Even as his mobility decreased due to the COVID-19 pandemic and programs were suspended, Marcia made sure he continued activities that were significant in his Caribbean culture, like dancing and singing at home. She stressed the importance of simple things: greeting him by name, stating who you are and why you are there, and crucially, going at the same pace as him, whether walking or climbing stairs, respecting his rhythm and abilities. She insightfully observed, "He's not stupid, he just doesn't want to do things sometimes," emphasizing the need for understanding and patience over coercion or assumption. This photo essay powerfully highlights how persons with dementia can be assisted to continue living and enjoying life through engaging in activities that have personal and cultural significance, reinforcing their unique identities and dignity right through their journey.
And finally, Helga Rohra's incredible work as a dementia activist truly embodies that fight for agency, for self-determination, for a voice.
Helga Rohra, diagnosed with young-onset dementia at just 54. She's a prolific international speaker and author. She became an activist quite deliberately to challenge the pervasive perception that people with dementia are automatically old, that they have no self-determination, and are primarily guided by our relatives. She passionately emphasizes that being diagnosed doesn't mean the end of life, but rather should be seen as a call to continue contributing to society and live fully.
She's rejecting the narrative of decline.
Completely. She advocates forcefully for dementia to be managed as a disability, which is a significant framing shift. This empowers people with dementia to be seen as the real experts by experience, and demands they be given a powerful voice in political decisions affecting their lives. She recounts this powerful moment where she challenged a chief neurologist who was questioning her diagnosis in front of an audience. She asserted, quite firmly, "I'm not prepared to talk to you anymore," reminding everyone that nobody's allowed to offend us by language nor by attitude. Her dream is of a world where people with dementia can confidently tell your boss at work and your colleagues about their diagnosis, where they can go on working in a team, and where they can raise your voice in local parliaments for our rights, particularly for dementia being treated and supported as a disability. She embodies the profound belief that a personality will not change, at least in the early stages of dementia, and that their rich biographies, their abilities, their perspectives persist and absolutely deserve respect and inclusion.
What a journey we've taken today, really unpacking the complex world of dementia. It's so clear that this isn't just a straightforward medical condition, is it? It's a deeply social and cultural phenomenon. It touches on everything from our deepest fears about aging and loss of control to the very structure of our economies and our care systems.
Indeed. We've seen how simply defining cognitive decline as dementia has these profound impacts on individuals, on families, and on society as a whole, how it can, sometimes unintentionally, lead to devalued lives and systemic inequities. Yet at the same time, we've also heard these incredibly powerful stories of resilience, of cultural resistance, and the enduring importance of identity, dignity, and simple human connection, regardless of a diagnosis.
It truly makes you think about how our societal frameworks, our economic forces, and even just our everyday language, the words we choose, shape the experiences of aging, and particularly how those with cognitive changes are perceived and treated.
And the push for critical dementia studies, which we've touched on, really aims to challenge these norms, to highlight the political nature of care. It's not just a private matter, to emphasize the critical need for diverse perspectives from different cultures, different identities, different experiences, and ultimately to explore the radical potential of building inclusive communities that truly value and celebrate all forms of cognitive difference. It's about building a society where everyone, regardless of their cognitive abilities, has a place, a purpose, and is seen and heard.